The acceptance letter crinkled in my sweaty palm as I watched my sister Rachel pose for yet another photo with our parents, her cap tilted at the perfect angle, her smile radiating the confidence of someone who believed she'd won. The irony burned in my chest like acid. She thought she'd stolen my future, my one shot at escaping the suffocating expectations of our Phoenix suburb where dreams went to die in strip malls and chain restaurants. What she didn't know was that while she was celebrating her supposed victory, my phone had 3 missed calls from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Victoria Hayes, but everyone calls me Tori. I'm 18 years old, and this is the story of how my sister's betrayal became the greatest gift she never meant to give me. It's also the story of how I learned that sometimes the universe has a sense of humor so dark, it makes your worst enemies look like amateur comedians. The backyard of our Scottsdale home buzzed with the nervous energy of a graduation party that felt more like a funeral for my dreams. Red and white streamers hung limply from the mesquite trees, their festive colors mocking the hollow feeling in my chest. Rachel had insisted on the party colors matching her high school's theme, of course. Everything always had to revolve around Rachel, the golden daughter who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. I stood near the dessert table, mechanically arranging cupcakes while watching my sister hold court near the pool. She wore her graduation cap like a crown, regaling our relatives with stories of her academic achievements. The same achievements that should have been mine, would have been mine if I hadn't made the mistake of trusting family with my most precious secret. "Tori, honey, come take a picture with your sister," my mother called out, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she wanted me to participate in Rachel's spotlight moments. Patricia Hayes had perfected the art of making requests sound like gentle suggestions while leaving no room for refusal. She stood behind her camera, her highlighted blonde hair perfectly styled despite the Arizona heat, looking every inch the proud suburban mother. I forced a smile and walked over, the acceptance letter still hidden in my pocket, feeling heavier with each step. Rachel threw her arm around my shoulders with the casual possessiveness of someone who believed she owned every space she occupied. At 19, she was only 11 months older than me, but she wielded that small age gap like a weapon, constantly reminding everyone that she was the responsible older sister, the one who made good choices. "Say cheese, girls," Mom chirped, but before she could snap the photo, Rachel leaned into me and whispered just loud enough for me to hear but quiet enough to maintain her innocent facade. "Thanks for the scholarship application, sis. I knew you wouldn't mind sharing since you were probably going to mess it up anyway." My blood turned to ice water in my veins. The smile froze on my face as the full weight of her words hit me. She knew, she had always known what she'd done, and she was proud of it. 3 months earlier, I had been working on my application for the Morrison Academic Excellence Scholarship, a full-ride opportunity that could change everything for a family like ours. My father David worked double shifts at the power plant, and Mom managed a small dental office, but even with both incomes, college for 2 daughters felt like trying to fill the Grand Canyon with a garden hose. The scholarship was my lifeline, my chance to prove that the quiet Hayes daughter had potential beyond what anyone imagined. I had spent weeks crafting the perfect application. My essays detailed my volunteer work at the community center where I tutored kids in math and science, my leadership role in our school's environmental club, and my dream of studying biochemistry to develop sustainable solutions for water purification. The application required official transcripts, recommendation letters, and a personal statement that had taken me 17 drafts to perfect. The night before the deadline, I had everything ready in a manila envelope on my desk. I remember going to bed feeling cautiously optimistic for the first time in months. When I woke up, the envelope was gone. "Rachel, have you seen my scholarship application? I left it right here," I had asked, trying to keep the panic from my voice as I searched my room frantically. "Scholarship application? I don't know what you're talking about," she had replied without looking up from her phone, but something in her voice had felt off. Too casual, too practiced. I had assumed I'd misplaced it in my nervousness, and spent the day frantically recreating everything I could, but I missed the deadline by 4 hours. The rejection letter came 2 weeks later, polite but final. No exceptions for late applications, no matter how exceptional the circumstances. What I didn't know then was that Rachel had taken my application, whiteout corrected my name to hers, and submitted it as her own work. My essays about my dreams became her dreams. My volunteer hours became her community service. My transcript, slightly superior to hers in mathematics and sciences, became the foundation of her supposed academic excellence. The scholarship committee had been so impressed with Rachel Hayes that they awarded her the full ride without hesitation. My work, my dreams, my future all handed to my sister on a silver platter while I watched my college prospects crumble into dust. Beautiful girls, Dad said, appearing beside Mom with his characteristic proud grin. David Hayes was a man who measured success in steady paychecks and well-behaved children, and by his standards he was winning at life. His work uniform had been replaced by his best polo shirt for the occasion, and his graying hair was combed back with more care than usual. My daughters are going to change the world. Well, Rachel is, Mom corrected with a laugh that felt like a slap. Full scholarship to Arizona State University, Dean's List potential, and already talking about graduate school. We're so proud of her ambition. I felt Rachel's grip tighten on my shoulder, a subtle warning disguised as sisterly affection. She had perfected this dance over the years, the art of claiming credit while making me complicit in my own invisibility. What about Tori? Asked Mrs. Rodriguez, our neighbor, who had known us since we were children. Janet Rodriguez had watched both Rachel and me grow up, had seen us playing in the same backyard where we now stood, and something in her expression suggested she remembered which daughter had always been helping the younger neighborhood kids with their homework. The question hung in the desert air like humidity, thick and uncomfortable. Mom's smile faltered for just a moment before she rallied with the enthusiasm of someone determined to find silver lining in a cloudy sky. Oh, Tori's going to the community college first, she said, her voice bright with forced optimism. It's very practical, really. She can live at home, save money, and transfer later if she decides she wants to pursue a 4-year degree. The if stung worse than the rest of it. As though my desire for higher education was a phase I might grow out of, like a childhood obsession with unicorns or boy bands. Community college is perfect for Tori, Rachel added, her voice dripping with false concern. She's always been more of a practical person than an academic one. Not everyone is cut out for university-level work, and that's totally fine. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pull out my transcripts and show everyone that my GPA was actually higher than Rachel's, that my SAT scores had been better, that the only difference between us was opportunity and her willingness to steal mine. Instead, I stood there smiling like a puppet while my sister rewrote history in real time. That's very mature of you, Tori, said Uncle Robert, Dad's brother, raising his beer in a mock toast. Knowing your limitations is the first step to success in life. Limitations. The word echoed in my head as I watched the adults nod approvingly at Rachel's supposed wisdom and my supposed acceptance of second place. They had no idea that the community college route wasn't my choice but my only remaining option after my real opportunity had been stolen. Marcus Thompson, Rachel's boyfriend of 2 years, chose that moment to make his grand entrance through the back gate. At 21, he carried himself with the swagger of someone who had never questioned whether the world would bend to accommodate his ambitions. He worked at his father's construction company and spoke about taking over the business someday with the certainty of inherited privilege. There's my college girl, he called out, sweeping Rachel into an elaborate kiss that made several relatives chuckle and Mom beam with approval. Sorry I'm late, babe. Had to stop and pick up your celebration gift. He produced a small velvet box from his pocket, and the backyard fell into the expectant silence that precedes life-changing moments. Rachel's eyes went wide, and for a second her carefully maintained composure cracked to reveal genuine surprise. Marcus, what are you doing? She whispered, but her voice carried clearly in the desert stillness. Rachel Hayes, he said, dropping to one knee on the patio stones, you're about to start an amazing journey at ASU, and I want to be part of that journey. Will you marry me? The eruption of squeals and applause felt like being trapped inside a popcorn machine. Rachel's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks as she nodded enthusiastically. Mom started crying immediately, and Dad clapped Marcus on the back with the hearty approval of a man gaining a son who understood the value of hard work and commitment. Through the chaos of congratulations and impromptu toasts, I felt my phone buzz against my hip. 3 times in quick succession, then silence. I ignored it, too numb to care about whatever social media updates or spam calls were demanding my attention. My sister was getting everything she wanted, built on the foundation of everything she had stolen from me, and somehow I was expected to celebrate. "This calls for champagne," Dad announced, disappearing into the house. "My little girl is graduating, getting married, and starting her college career all in the same summer. We're the luckiest parents in Arizona. Tori, isn't this exciting?" Mom grabbed my arm with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely couldn't understand why I wasn't jumping up and down. "You're going to be a bridesmaid, of course, and just think, by the time Rachel graduates from ASU, you might be ready to transfer there yourself. You could be college roommates." The thought of being Rachel's college roommate, watching her live my dreams while I played catch-up with credits from community college, made my stomach turn. But I nodded and smiled because that's what was expected, what had always been expected. Rachel was showing off her ring to Mrs. Rodriguez, a modest diamond that caught the afternoon light and threw tiny rainbows across the patio furniture. She looked radiant, glowing with the confidence of someone whose life was unfolding exactly according to plan. Her plan built with my blueprint. "The wedding will have to wait until after my first semester," she was saying, her voice carrying the authority of someone making important life decisions. "I want to focus on establishing myself academically before taking on the responsibilities of marriage."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"Marcus understands that my education comes first. My education comes first." The words felt like mockery, considering she was talking about my scholarship, my essays, my future that she had claimed as her own. My phone buzzed again, more insistently this time. I glanced down and saw 3 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize, all from the same Massachusetts area code. Probably a telemarketer, I thought, but something made me excuse myself from the celebration and step inside to check the voicemail. The house felt blissfully cool after the desert heat, and the sudden quiet was like diving underwater. I could still hear the party through the sliding glass door, but it felt distant now, like watching a movie of someone else's life. I pressed play on the first voicemail, and nearly dropped the phone. "Hello, this is Dr. Elizabeth Warner, from Harvard University's admissions office. I'm trying to reach Victoria Hayes, regarding an urgent matter concerning her application. Please call me back at your earliest convenience, at..." My hands started shaking so badly I could barely manage to replay the message. Harvard University. Calling me, about an application I had never submitted. The second message was more urgent. "Miss Hayes, this is Dr. Warner again. I've been trying to reach you about your acceptance to Harvard University. There seems to be some confusion with our records, and I need to speak with you immediately about your scholarship award." The third message made my knees buckle. "Victoria, this is Elizabeth Warner, at Harvard. I'm going to be direct with you. We have reason to believe there may have been an error in our communications. You were accepted to Harvard with our most prestigious scholarship, the Presidential Merit Award, but we've been calling the wrong number for 3 months. Please contact me immediately. This is time-sensitive." I stood in the middle of our living room, surrounded by Rachel's graduation photos and family portraits that told the story of the perfect Hayes daughters, and realized that my sister's betrayal might have been the best thing that ever happened to me. Outside, the party continued without me, celebrating Rachel's stolen dreams and bright future. Inside, I held a phone that contained the key to a future she could never steal, could never even imagine. Harvard University had been trying to reach me for 3 months. While Rachel was basking in the glory of the Morrison scholarship she had stolen, while I was resigning myself to community college and a life of settling for less, the most prestigious university in the world had been trying to tell me I was one of their chosen few. I thought about all the college applications I had submitted in those frantic weeks after missing the Morrison deadline, sending out a desperate flurry of hopes to schools that seemed impossibly out of reach. I had applied to Harvard on a whim, knowing the odds were astronomical, treating it like buying a lottery ticket, worth the $20 application fee just to dream for a moment. Somehow, impossibly, I had won a lottery I didn't even remember entering. The Presidential Merit Award, according to the quick internet search I managed with trembling fingers, was a full ride to Harvard that covered not just tuition but room, board, books, and a yearly stipend for personal expenses. It was awarded to only 50 students nationwide each year, students who demonstrated not just academic excellence, but the potential to change the world. I had been chosen. Not Rachel with her stolen scholarship application, not Rachel with her carefully curated image of academic success, but me. Victoria Hayes, the practical daughter, the one with limitations, the one destined for community college, because she wasn't cut out for university-level work. Through the sliding glass door, I could see my sister posing for more photos, her engagement ring catching the light, her graduation cap perfectly positioned, her smile brilliant with the confidence of someone who believed she had won the game of life. She had no idea that while she was celebrating her theft of my small-town scholarship, I had been awarded something she couldn't even comprehend. The Morrison Scholarship was worth $30,000 over 4 years. The Presidential Merit Award was worth nearly $300,000, plus the kind of connections and opportunities that money couldn't buy. I looked at my phone, at Dr. Warner's number, at the gateway to a future beyond anything my family had ever imagined for me. Outside, Dad was proposing a toast to Rachel's bright future. Mom was crying happy tears and talking about wedding plans. Marcus was accepting congratulations on his excellent choice of wife. And I was standing in the quiet house, holding the key to a kingdom none of them knew existed, trying to decide whether to walk back outside and take my place in their story, or step through the door that would change everything forever. The acceptance letter in my pocket crinkled again, as I reached for my phone to call Dr. Warner back. Rachel thought she had stolen my future, but she had only stolen my backup plan. My real future, the one I had earned through my own merit and determination, was still waiting for me in Cambridge, Massachusetts. As I dialed the number, I could hear my sister's laughter floating through the desert air, confident and carefree, completely unaware that her moment of triumph was about to become the opening act of a much larger story. A story where the quiet daughter would finally find her voice, and where betrayal would transform into the greatest gift she never saw coming. Dr. Elizabeth Warner's voice was crisp and professional when she answered on the second ring, but I could hear something else underneath, relief maybe, or curiosity. Victoria Hayes, I've been hoping to hear from you. I'm so sorry, I managed my voice barely above a whisper, as I pressed myself against the kitchen counter, trying to put as much distance as possible between myself and the sliding glass door, where my family continued their celebration. I just got your messages. I had no idea Harvard was trying to reach me. That's quite understandable, given the circumstances, Dr. Warner said, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. There was an administrative error in our communications department. We had an incorrect phone number in our system for 3 months. I want to personally apologize for any stress this may have caused you during what should have been a celebratory time. Celebratory time. I almost laughed at the irony. While my family had been celebrating Rachel's stolen achievements, Harvard had been trying to celebrate mine. Victoria, I need to confirm some details with you. You submitted your application in February for our Presidential Merit Award program. Is that correct? Yes, I said, remembering the desperate night when I had sent out applications to 12 universities, treating each one like a message in a bottle, thrown into an ocean of impossible dreams. But I honestly didn't think I had any chance of being accepted, let alone receiving a scholarship. Your application was extraordinary, Dr. Warner said warmly. Your research proposal on sustainable water purification systems caught the attention of several faculty members in our environmental engineering department. Combined with your academic record and your volunteer work, you were unanimously selected for our most prestigious undergraduate award. My legs felt weak. I slid down the kitchen cabinet until I was sitting on the cool tile floor, phone pressed to my ear, trying to process words that seemed too good to be true. Through the window, I could see Rachel holding court by the pool, her engagement ring glinting as she gestured animatedly to our relatives. The Presidential Merit Award covers full tuition, room and board, a yearly stipend of $15,000 for personal expenses, and guaranteed funding for undergraduate research opportunities, Dr. Warner continued. You'll also be paired with a faculty mentor in your chosen field, and have access to exclusive internship programs with our partner organizations. $15,000 a year, just for personal expenses. That was more than Mom made in 6 months at the dental office. The full value of what I was being offered was staggering, but it was the research opportunities that made my heart race. Real scientific work, the chance to contribute to solutions for problems that kept me awake at night, thinking about water shortages and environmental degradation. There is one complication, Dr. Warner said, and my stomach dropped. Due to the delay in our communications, we need your acceptance confirmation and enrollment paperwork completed within the next 2 weeks. Classes begin in 7 weeks, and there are several orientation programs you'll need to attend. 2 weeks. I stared through the kitchen window at the graduation party that was supposed to be celebrating the end of my childhood and the beginning of my adult life. In 2 weeks, I would either be enrolling at Harvard University or watching Rachel pack for Arizona State University, while I prepared for community college classes that would start 3 weeks later. I understand this is sudden, Dr. Warner continued, but I want to assure you that our financial aid office can work with you on any logistical challenges. We have emergency assistance programs for students who need help with travel costs, winter clothing allowances for students from warmer climates, and laptop loan programs. We want to make this transition as smooth as possible for you. Emergency assistance programs, winter clothing allowances, the thoughtfulness of it, the assumption that I was worth investing in, worth removing obstacles for, made my throat tight with emotion. No one in my family had ever talked about removing obstacles from my path. Instead, they had spent years pointing out all the reasons why my dreams were impractical, unrealistic, beyond my reach. Victoria, are you still there? Yes, I said quickly. I'm here, this is a lot to process. Of course it is. I imagine you have family celebrations happening right now for graduation season. Are your parents available to speak with me? I find that sometimes parents have questions about the logistics of sending their child across the country for college. My parents. I looked through the window again at Mom and Dad, who were now posing for photos with Rachel and Marcus, their faces glowing with pride. They had no idea that their other daughter had just been offered an opportunity that would change the trajectory of not just my life, but potentially our entire family's future. They're busy right now, I said. Could I call you back tomorrow? I need to discuss this with them. Absolutely. But Victoria, I do want to emphasize the time sensitivity. We held your spot for 3 months, because of our error, but we can't hold it indefinitely. Other students on our waitlist are eager for any opportunity to join our incoming class. After I hung up, I sat on the kitchen floor for several minutes, trying to organize my thoughts into something resembling coherence. Outside, the party was reaching its peak energy. Someone had turned on music, and I could hear the gentle splash of people gathering around the pool. Normal sounds of a normal family celebration, completely unaware that the world had just shifted on its axis. I pulled myself up and walked to the window, studying my family with new eyes. Mom was showing Rachel's engagement ring to Mrs. Rodriguez, her face animated with the joy of a mother whose daughter was achieving all the traditional milestones at the right times. Dad was grilling hamburgers with Uncle Robert, their conversation punctuated by easy laughter and the crack of beer cans opening. Rachel sat in the center of it all like a queen holding court, her graduation cap now hanging from the back of her chair, her ring catching the afternoon light as she gestured. Marcus sat beside her with his arm draped possessively across her shoulders, already looking like the successful husband of a college graduate. And then there was me, the ghost at the feast, the daughter who existed in the margins of family photos and conversations. The practical one, the one with limitations, the one who would go to community college because she wasn't quite bright enough for anything better. Except now I knew the truth. I wasn't just bright enough for something better, I was bright enough for the best. Harvard University, the institution that had educated presidents and Nobel Prize winners, had chosen me, not because of family connections or inherited privilege, but because of my own merit, my own potential, my own dreams. The sliding glass door opened, and Mom stepped inside, her cheeks flushed from the heat and excitement. "Tori, honey, what are you doing in here? You're missing all the fun, just needed some quiet for a minute," I said, slipping my phone into my back pocket. "It's been a long day." Mom's expression softened with maternal concern. "I know this must be hard for you, sweetheart, watching your sister achieve so much while you're still figuring out your path, but you'll find your way. Community college is a perfectly respectable choice, and who knows? Maybe in a few years you'll transfer to a 4-year school. Maybe in a few years." The casual dismissal of my potential, spoken with such loving certainty, hit me differently now that I knew what I was actually capable of achieving. Mom wasn't being cruel, she genuinely believed she was being supportive, encouraging me to be realistic about my limitations. "Mom," I said carefully, "what if I told you that I had other options for college? Options we haven't discussed." She tilted her head with the patient expression of someone humoring a child's fantasy. "What kind of options, honey?" I hesitated, my hand moving instinctively to my phone. The smart thing would be to tell her everything right now, to share the incredible news and let the family celebration expand to include both daughters. But something held me back, an instinct born of years of watching Rachel claim credit for achievements that weren't entirely her own. Just, hypothetically, I said, what would you say if I got accepted to a really good university? With a scholarship? Mom's smile became even more indulgent. That would be wonderful, sweetheart, but most scholarship deadlines were months ago, and you missed the Morrison application. I think the realistic thing is to focus on community college and maybe apply for transfer scholarships later. The Morrison application, the one Rachel had stolen and submitted as her own. Mom had no idea that her encouragement toward realism was based on a crime, that the daughter she was gently counseling toward lower expectations had already achieved something beyond the reach of the daughter she was celebrating. Right, I said. Realistic expectations. Exactly. Mom patted my shoulder with the satisfied air of someone who had successfully guided a wayward child back toward practical thinking. Now come back outside. Mrs. Rodriguez was asking about your plans, and I told her about the community college program. She thinks it's very sensible. I followed Mom back outside, but everything felt different now. The conversations that had felt dismissive before now seemed almost surreal in their wrongness. Mrs. Rodriguez approached me with the kind expression of someone preparing to offer encouragement to the family disappointment. Tori, your mother tells me you're starting at Maricopa Community College in the fall. That's wonderful, dear. My nephew went there for his associate's degree and now he's a dental hygienist. Very stable career. Thank you, I said, because what else could I say? That while we were discussing dental hygienist career paths, Harvard University was waiting for my enrollment confirmation. That the daughter everyone was gently encouraging toward realistic expectations had been selected as one of 50 students nationwide to receive their most prestigious scholarship. Rachel appeared at my elbow with the fluid grace of someone who had perfected the art of inserting herself into any conversation. Community college is perfect for Tori, she said with sisterly authority. She's always been more practical than academic. Not everyone needs to go to a 4-year university to be successful. That's very mature of both of you girls to understand your different strengths, Mrs. Rodriguez said approvingly. Rachel with her academic achievements and scholarship, and Tori with her practical approach to education. Academic achievements. I watched Rachel nod graciously, accepting praise for accomplishments that were fundamentally mine. The volunteer work with underprivileged children that had impressed the scholarship committee. I had spent 2 years tutoring kids in math and science while Rachel complained about having to complete 20 hours of community service for graduation. The environmental club leadership that demonstrated my commitment to sustainability. I had organized 3 successful campus recycling initiatives while Rachel attended meetings just long enough to get credit for participation. Even her supposed academic excellence was an illusion built on small advantages compounded over time. She had always been better at managing teachers' perceptions, turning in assignments that looked polished even when the content was shallow. I had always been better at understanding the material itself, but I preferred working quietly in the background to drawing attention to my achievements. The scholarship committee had seen through the surface polish to recognize genuine intellectual curiosity and potential. They had chosen the right sister. They just didn't know it yet. Speaking of achievements, Uncle Robert said, joining our little circle with a beer in one hand and a paper plate loaded with food in the other. I have to say, Patricia, you and David have done an amazing job raising these girls. Rachel's going to make you proud at ASU. We're already proud, Dad said, materializing beside us with the timing of someone who had developed a paternal radar for conversations about his daughters. Both of our girls are going to do great things. Different paths, but both successful in their own ways. Different paths. I almost laughed at how little they understood about just how different our paths were about to become. Rachel would go to Arizona State University on a scholarship she had stolen, studying communications or business administration, something practical and unremarkable that would lead to a decent middle-class life in Phoenix. She would marry Marcus, have children, live in a suburb, not too different from the one where we had grown up. And I would go to Harvard University, where I would study environmental engineering and biochemistry, where I would work with professors who were leaders in their fields, where I would have access to research opportunities and resources that could actually help solve the problems that kept me awake at night worrying about the future of the planet. The conversation continued around me, but I felt like I was watching it from a great distance. Uncle Robert was telling a story about his college days, something involving a fraternity prank and a dean's office. Mom was planning Rachel's going-away party for August. Dad was giving Marcus advice about marriage based on 23 years of experience with Mom. Normal family interactions, the kind of easy familiarity that comes from years of established roles and expectations. Rachel was the star, Mom and Dad were the proud parents, Uncle Robert was the wise older brother dispensing life advice, and I was the quiet daughter who listened more than she spoke, who would stay close to home and follow a predictable path toward a predictable life. Except now I knew that in 7 weeks, I would be living in a dormitory in Massachusetts, 1,500 miles away from anyone who had ever told me to be realistic about my limitations. I would be surrounded by some of the brightest minds in the world, people who would challenge me to think bigger, dream bigger, achieve more than I had ever imagined possible. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Marcus was telling everyone about his promotion prospects at the construction company, how his father was planning to retire in a few years and hand over the business. Rachel will be the perfect wife for a business owner, he said with the confidence of someone who had never questioned whether his life would unfold according to plan. She understands the importance of community connections and maintaining a professional image. Rachel glowed under the praise, her hand resting on Marcus's arm in a gesture of pleased ownership. I'm thinking about majoring in public relations or marketing, she said, something that would complement Marcus's business interests. We want to build something together. Build something together. The phrase echoed in my mind as I watched them, this couple who had their entire future mapped out in comfortable, conventional terms. Rachel would use my stolen scholarship to get a degree that would help her husband's inherited business succeed. She would become Mrs. Marcus Thompson, respected member of the Scottsdale business community, active in local charities and social organizations. It would be a good life by every traditional measure. Stable, comfortable, socially acceptable. The kind of life our parents had always envisioned for both their daughters, just with slight variations in the details. But it wasn't the life I wanted, and now I knew it wasn't the life I had to accept. My phone buzzed against my hip, and I glanced down to see a text from an unknown number. Victoria, this is Dr. Warner. I forgot to mention that Harvard has a summer orientation program for Presidential Merit Award recipients. If you're able to confirm your acceptance within the next few days, we can arrange for you to visit campus next week. All expenses paid, of course. This would give you a chance to meet other incoming students and get a feel for the environment before making your final decision. Next week. While Rachel was planning her engagement party and shopping for dorm room decorations for ASU, I could be walking through Harvard Yard, meeting professors who could shape the next 4 years of my intellectual development. I looked up from my phone to find Dad watching me with the gentle concern of a parent who had noticed his child seemed distracted. Everything okay, sweetheart? You seem a little quiet today. Just thinking about the future, I said, which was true enough. Big changes ahead for all of us, he agreed. Your sister starting college, getting married, you beginning your own educational journey. Your mother and I are going to miss having both our girls at home. Both our girls. I wondered how he would feel when he learned that one of his girls would be 3,000 miles away instead of 20 minutes across town. Would he be proud that his daughter had achieved something extraordinary, or would he be hurt that she had hidden such momentous news from the family? Dad, I said impulsively, what would you say if I told you I had been accepted to a really good college? Like really, really good. He chuckled with the indulgent affection of a father who enjoyed his daughter's imagination. I'd say that would be wonderful, honey. But I'd also remind you that sometimes the really good colleges aren't necessarily the right fit for everyone. Community college will give you a chance to explore your interests without the pressure and expense of a big university. The pressure and expense. I thought about Dr. Warner's mention of emergency assistance programs, laptop loans, winter clothing allowances. Harvard wasn't just offering me an education, they were offering to remove every possible obstacle from my path. Meanwhile, my father was encouraging me to choose the path with the fewest challenges, not because it would lead to better outcomes, but because it seemed safer. But hypothetically, I pressed, if I had gotten into somewhere really prestigious, would you be supportive? Dad's expression grew more serious, and he glanced around to make sure no one else was listening. Tori, I know this is hard for you, watching Rachel get all this attention and opportunity, but honey, you have to be realistic about your situation. The scholarship deadlines have passed, and even if they hadn't, those competitive programs are for students with very specific qualifications. Very specific qualifications, like a 4.2 GPA, perfect attendance, 2 years of volunteer tutoring, leadership roles in 3 different clubs, and a research proposal that had impressed Harvard faculty members. All qualifications I possessed, but apparently my own father couldn't imagine me achieving. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the pool. Rachel had stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the patio stones, her face flushed with what looked like anger or embarrassment. "What do you mean suspicious?" she was saying to someone I couldn't see from my angle. Mom hurried over, her hostess instincts activated by the sharp tone in Rachel's voice. "What's wrong, honey?" Mrs. Rodriguez emerged from behind the pool chairs, her expression troubled. "I was just mentioning that my sister works in the financial aid office at ASU, and she said something interesting about the Morrison Scholarship this year." My heart stopped. I could feel Dad's attention shift from our conversation to whatever drama was unfolding by the pool, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but wait for Mrs. Rodriguez to continue. She said the winning application was unusual because it contained work that seemed too advanced for a typical high school student. The research citations and volunteer experiences were impressive, but something about the writing style in the essays felt inconsistent. They almost awarded it to someone else, because of concerns about authenticity. Rachel's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "That's ridiculous," she said, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. "My application was completely legitimate." "Oh, I'm sure it was, dear," Mrs. Rodriguez said quickly, clearly regretting bringing up the topic. "I probably misunderstood what my sister was telling me. You know how these administrative people can be, always looking for problems where none exist." But the damage was done. A seed of doubt had been planted, and I could see it taking root in the faces around the pool. Uncle Robert was frowning slightly, his beer forgotten in his hand. Mom was looking between Rachel and Mrs. Rodriguez with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle. Dad had stepped closer to the group, his protective instincts engaged but his target unclear. "What exactly did your sister say?" Mom asked, her voice carefully neutral. Mrs. Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing she had kept her sister's observations to herself. Just that the application contained some inconsistencies. The volunteer hours at the community center, for instance. They called to verify, and the coordinator there said she remembered the volunteer, but thought the name was different. Victoria maybe. But then the application was submitted under Rachel's name, so they assumed there had been some confusion in their records. The silence that followed was profound. I could hear the gentle hum of the pool filter, the distant sound of traffic from the street, the almost inaudible buzz of the overhead patio lights that had automatically turned on as the sun began to set. But from the circle of people around Rachel, there was nothing but the heavy quiet of a secret being exposed. Rachel's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. Her engagement ring caught the light, as her hands trembled slightly, the symbol of her bright future suddenly seeming less secure. And in that moment, I realized that my sister's betrayal was about to become public knowledge, whether I revealed my Harvard acceptance or not. The truth had a way of surfacing, even when people worked hard to bury it. Rachel's carefully constructed image was cracking, and soon everyone would know what kind of person she really was. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened Dr. Warner's text message. The summer orientation program. A chance to visit Harvard next week, to see my future with my own eyes before making the final commitment. I started typing my response. "Dr. Warner, I would love to participate in the summer orientation program. When can we schedule my visit?" Because sometimes the universe has a sense of timing that makes even the best storytellers jealous. Rachel's stolen dreams were about to crumble publicly, and my real dreams were about to begin privately, at least for a few more minutes. The weight of everyone's stares pressed down on Rachel like a physical force. I watched her face cycle through expressions, confusion, indignation, fear as she searched for words that could explain away what Mrs. Rodriguez had just revealed. The community center volunteer coordinator remembered someone named Victoria, not Rachel. The pieces of her carefully constructed lie were beginning to show their seams. "There must be some mistake," Rachel finally managed, her voice higher than usual. Maybe the coordinator was thinking of someone else. There were several volunteers working there, but honey, Mrs. Rodriguez said gently. My sister specifically mentioned that the coordinator was very clear. She said the volunteer who worked with the math and science tutoring program was definitely named Victoria. She remembered because the girl had such a gift for explaining complex concepts to the younger children. Mom's head turned toward me with mechanical precision, her eyes narrowing as she tried to process this new information. "Tori, you volunteered at the community center." "Yes," I said simply, meeting her gaze. "For 2 years." Every Tuesday and Thursday after school, plus weekend sessions during exam periods. The confession hung in the desert air, like heat lightning. Dad's expression shifted from confusion to something approaching understanding, though he hadn't grasped the full scope of what was happening yet. 2 years, he repeated. You never mentioned volunteering anywhere. And I did mention it, I said quietly. Several times. You said it was nice that I was keeping busy after school instead of hanging around the house getting into trouble. The memory was specific and painful. I had been so excited to tell them about my first successful tutoring session with Miguel, a 7-year-old who had been struggling with basic multiplication. When he finally understood the concept and his face lit up with that magical moment of comprehension, I had rushed home to share the joy with my family. Dad had barely looked up from his newspaper when he muttered his response about staying busy. Mom had been more interested in discussing Rachel's latest academic achievement. Uncle Robert was studying Rachel with the sharp attention of someone who had spent decades in construction management, where attention to detail meant the difference between safety and disaster. Rachel, when exactly did you start volunteering at the community center? The question was simple, direct, and completely devastating. Rachel's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. She couldn't claim to have volunteered there without contradicting her own timeline, and she couldn't admit to lying without destroying everything she had built on that foundation. Marcus stepped closer to his fiancée, his protective instincts overriding his confusion. What difference does it make when she started? The important thing is that she did the work and earned the scholarship. Actually, Mrs. Rodriguez said, her discomfort growing with each revelation. According to my sister, that's part of what raised the red flags. The application claimed extensive volunteer experience, but when they tried to verify the hours, the coordinator could only confirm work done by someone named Victoria. No record of Rachel Hayes in their volunteer database at all. The silence that followed was the kind that precedes earthquakes, pregnant with potential energy waiting to be released. I could see the exact moment when Mom made the connection, when the pieces clicked into place in her mind. Her face went through a complex series of expressions: realization, horror, disappointment, and something that might have been shame. Tori, she said slowly, did you apply for the Morrison Scholarship? The question was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of a judge passing sentence. Everyone turned to look at me, and I felt the familiar sensation of being the center of unwanted attention, except this time the attention carried a different quality. Instead of dismissive tolerance, I could see genuine curiosity, even anticipation. Yes, I said. I spent 3 weeks working on the application. I had everything ready the night before the deadline. Then where is it? Rachel's voice cracked as she spoke, desperation leaking through her facade of innocence. If you applied, where's your application? Where's your rejection letter? I don't have a rejection letter, I said calmly. Because I never submitted an application. Someone took it from my desk the night before the deadline. The accusation hung between us like a bridge neither of us wanted to cross. Rachel's face cycled through emotions so quickly I could barely track them: anger, fear, defiance, calculation. She was trying to figure out how much I knew, how much I could prove, how much damage control she would need to do. That's impossible, she said finally. Why would anyone take your application? I think you know why, I replied quietly. Marcus looked between us with growing alarm. What are you talking about? Rachel, what is she talking about? Before Rachel could respond, Dad stepped forward with the measured movement of someone trying to prevent a family crisis from exploding into something irreparable. Let's all take a breath here. There's obviously been some kind of misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, I said, my voice gaining strength with each word. Rachel took my scholarship application and submitted it as her own. She used my essays, my volunteer hours, my recommendations, everything. The only thing she changed was the name. The accusation was out now, stark and undeniable in the fading desert light. Rachel's face went completely white, and for a moment I thought she might faint. Marcus actually took a step backward, as though he was trying to distance himself from the implications of what he was hearing. That's a serious allegation, Tori, Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. I could see him running through memories, trying to remember conversations, trying to piece together a timeline that would either support or refute what I was claiming. It's a serious crime, Uncle Robert said grimly. Scholarship fraud is a felony in most states. Universities take that kind of thing very seriously. The word felony seemed to galvanize Rachel out of her shocked silence. This is ridiculous, she said, her voice taking on the sharp edge of someone backed into a corner. Tori is obviously jealous that I got the scholarship and she didn't. She's making up stories to try to make herself feel better about her failures. Then explain, the volunteer coordinator, Mrs. Rodriguez said quietly. Explain why she has no record of you but clear memories of Victoria. Maybe the coordinator is confused, Rachel shot back. Maybe she's mixing up names. People make mistakes all the time, multiple mistakes. Uncle Robert pressed. The volunteer hours, the coordinator's memories, the inconsistent writing style that the scholarship committee noted, that's a lot of coincidences. I could see Rachel's carefully constructed world beginning to collapse around her, and part of me felt sorry for her. She had built her entire identity around being the successful daughter, the one who made good choices, the one who earned recognition and praise. Without that identity, who was she? But my sympathy was tempered by years of watching her take credit for achievements that weren't entirely her own, of being dismissed and overlooked while she basked in unearned glory. This moment had been building for a long time, and now that it was here, I felt a strange sense of calm. There's one way to settle this, I said quietly. The essays. I still have all my drafts saved on my computer, with timestamps showing when they were created and modified. We could compare them to what was submitted in Rachel's application. The suggestion hit like a physical blow. Rachel actually staggered backward, her hand flying to her throat as though she was having trouble breathing. Marcus caught her arm to steady her, his face a mask of growing comprehension and horror. You kept drafts, Rachel whispered. 17 of them, I confirmed. I worked on that personal statement for weeks, trying to get it exactly right. Every version is saved with the date and time I worked on it. The final version was completed 3 days before the deadline. Dad was studying both his daughters with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle that kept changing shape. Rachel, do you have drafts of your essays? I don't save drafts, she stammered. I write everything in one sitting. I've always been good at that. The scholarship committee specifically noted the sophisticated writing style and mature perspective in the essays, Mrs. Rodriguez said reluctantly, clearly wishing she had never brought up the subject. They said it was unusually advanced for a high school student. Mom had been silent throughout this exchange, but now she spoke with the careful precision of someone trying to hold herself together. Tori, if what you're saying is true, if Rachel really did steal your application, why didn't you tell us immediately? Why did you let her accept the scholarship? The question cut deep because it forced me to confront my own choices, my own complicity in the situation. Why had I stayed silent? Why had I let Rachel bask in glory that belonged to me? Because I knew you wouldn't believe me. I said honestly. Rachel has always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. If I had accused her of stealing my application, you would have assumed I was lying, that I was just jealous of her success. The truth of that statement was written across Mom's face. Even now, even with all the evidence mounting against Rachel, I could see her struggling to accept that her perfect daughter was capable of such deception. That's not fair, Mom protested weakly. We would have listened to you. Would you? I asked. When I told you about my volunteer work, you barely acknowledged it. When I mentioned my environmental club activities, you changed the subject to Rachel's achievements. When I tried to talk about my college plans, you redirected me toward realistic expectations. You've spent years making it clear that Rachel is the daughter with potential, and I'm the daughter who needs to be practical. The words came out more bitter than I had intended, years of accumulated resentment finally finding voice. But they were true, and everyone standing around that pool knew it. Marcus had been growing paler throughout this conversation, and now he looked like someone who had just learned that his lottery ticket was counterfeit. Rachel, he said quietly, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't steal your sister's scholarship. Rachel looked at her fiancé with desperate eyes, searching for some way to explain or justify what she had done. But there was no explanation that would satisfy him, no justification that would restore his faith in her character. It's not that simple, she said finally. Tori had given up, she missed the deadline. The application was just sitting there, going to waste. I thought I could make better use of it. The confession was like a dam breaking. Once the truth started flowing, it couldn't be stopped. Marcus stepped away from her as though she had physically struck him. You stole your sister's work, he said, his voice flat with disbelief. You built our entire relationship on a lie. It wasn't a lie, Rachel protested desperately. I mean, the volunteer work was hers, but I would have done the same work if I had thought of it. The essays were about experiences we both had. We grew up in the same house, had the same opportunities. We didn't have the same opportunities, I said quietly. You had parents who believed in your potential from the beginning. You had teachers who saw leadership qualities in you because you were confident and outgoing. You had a boyfriend who supported your ambitions, and a family who celebrated your achievements. I had to create my own opportunities, because no one else bothered to notice I had potential. The truth of that statement was devastating in its simplicity. Rachel had succeeded not just because of her own abilities, but because she had operated within a system that was designed to support and encourage her. I had succeeded despite operating within a system that consistently underestimated and overlooked me. Dad was staring at Rachel with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of disappointment and something approaching disgust. Rachel, how could you do this to your sister? How could you do this to our family? Our family, Rachel laughed bitterly. This family has never done anything for me except expect me to be perfect all the time. Do you know how exhausting it is to be the responsible daughter, the one who never makes mistakes, the one who always has to set a good example? So you decided to steal from your sister instead. Uncle Robert's voice was cold with judgment. You decided to commit fraud because being responsible was too much work. I didn't steal anything, Rachel insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. The application was just sitting there. Tori had given up. I saw an opportunity and I took it. You saw an opportunity to commit a felony. Dad corrected grimly. You saw an opportunity to destroy your sister's future for your own benefit. The weight of what Rachel had done was finally sinking in for everyone present. This wasn't just a family squabble or a moment of poor judgment. This was a deliberate crime, with real consequences for real people. The scholarship money that should have gone to me had gone to her instead. The opportunities that should have opened up for me had opened up for her instead. But as I stood there watching my family grapple with the scope of Rachel's betrayal, I felt something unexpected. Instead of anger or vindication, I felt a profound sense of relief. The truth was finally out, and with it came a freedom I hadn't realized I was missing. For years I had carried the weight of being the disappointing daughter, the one who wasn't quite measuring up to her potential. Now I understood that my potential had never been fairly evaluated, because the evidence of it had been stolen and presented as someone else's achievement. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I glanced down to see another message from Dr. Warner. Victoria, I've just spoken with our orientation coordinator. We can arrange for you to fly to Boston this Thursday for a 3-day campus visit. Housing and meals will be provided, and you'll have a chance to meet with faculty in the environmental engineering department. Please let me know if this works with your schedule. This Thursday. In 3 days, I could be walking through Harvard Yard, meeting the professors who would shape my future, seeing the laboratories where I might conduct research that could actually make a difference in the world. I looked up from my phone to find Mom watching me with an expression of growing concern. Tori, who keeps texting you? The question was innocent enough, but it felt loaded with significance. This was my moment, my chance to reveal the truth about my own achievements, to show my family that while they had been celebrating Rachel's stolen success, I had been earning something far greater on my own merit. But something held me back. Maybe it was years of conditioning to stay in the background, to let Rachel have the spotlight. Maybe it was uncertainty about how they would react to news that would overshadow even the scandal of Rachel's theft. Or maybe it was the realization that I didn't need their validation anymore. Harvard University had already validated me. The most prestigious institution of higher learning in the world had looked at my work, my achievements, my potential, and decided I was worth investing in. Dr. Warner and the admissions committee had seen something in me that my own family had missed. Just a friend from school, I said quietly, slipping the phone back into my pocket. The lie felt strange on my tongue, but it also felt protective. This news was mine to share when I was ready, on my own terms, in my own time. Rachel had stolen my scholarship application, but she couldn't steal this moment from me. Marcus was shaking his head slowly, as though he was trying to wake up from a bad dream. Rachel, I can't. I don't know how to process this. Everything I thought I knew about you, about us, it's all been based on a lie. It hasn't all been a lie. Rachel pleaded, tears streaming down her face now. My feelings for you are real. My love for you is real. I made a mistake, but that doesn't change how I feel about you or about our future together. A mistake? Marcus's voice was incredulous. Rachel, you committed fraud. You stole your sister's work and built our entire relationship on the foundation of that theft. How am I supposed to trust you after this? The engagement ring on Rachel's finger caught the patio lights as her hands trembled. The symbol of her bright future, the promise of the life she had planned, suddenly looked fragile and uncertain. Marcus, please, she whispered. We can work through this. People make mistakes. People do stupid things when they're desperate. Were you desperate? Dad asked, his voice heavy with disappointment. Were you so desperate for success that you had to steal it from your own sister? Rachel's composure finally cracked completely. The careful facade she had maintained throughout high school, the image of the perfect daughter, who made good choices and earned recognition through her own merit, shattered like glass hitting concrete. Yes, she screamed, her voice raw with emotion. Yes, I was desperate. Do you know what it's like to live in the shadow of someone who makes everything look effortless? Do you know what it's like to work twice as hard for half the recognition? The accusation was so far from reality that it left everyone speechless. Rachel thought she lived in my shadow. Rachel, who had been the center of attention at every family gathering for as long as I could remember. Tori's shadow. Mom said faintly, Rachel, what are you talking about? She's always been smarter. Rachel said the words tumbling out in a rush of long-suppressed resentment. In math and science, in everything that actually matters. Teachers always liked her better because she actually understood the material instead of just memorizing it. But she never cared about getting credit for it. So everyone assumed I was the smart one. The confession was stunning in its honesty and devastating in its implications. Rachel had been living with the knowledge that she was the lesser sister academically, that her achievements were built on perception rather than substance. The scholarship theft hadn't been a moment of opportunistic greed. It had been the culmination of years of insecurity and resentment. So you decided to steal her work instead of doing your own? Uncle Robert's judgment was clear in his voice. I tried to do my own work, Rachel protested. But nothing I wrote was good enough. Nothing I achieved was impressive enough. The scholarship application I drafted was boring and ordinary, exactly like everything else I'd ever done. When I saw Tori's application just sitting there, when I realized she had given up on it, felt like fate, as though the universe had conspired to help her commit fraud against her own sister. I thought about the 3 missed calls from Harvard University, about Dr. Warner's messages about orientation programs and faculty meetings, about opportunities that Rachel couldn't even imagine. While she had been stealing my small-town scholarship and calling it fate, I had been earning something infinitely more valuable through my own merit. The irony was so profound it took my breath away. Rachel had committed a crime to steal a $30,000 scholarship to a state university, while I had earned a $300,000 scholarship to the most prestigious university in the world. She had destroyed her integrity and her relationships to claim achievements that paled in comparison to what I had accomplished quietly, honestly, on my own. My phone buzzed again, and this time I couldn't resist checking the message. Dr. Warner had sent a photo of Harvard Yard in the late afternoon sunlight, with a note, I thought you might like to see where you'll be living and studying this fall. The dorms in this courtyard house are Presidential Merit Award recipients. It's a special community of exceptional students. I stared at the image, at the ivy-covered buildings and the students walking across perfectly manicured grass, and felt a profound sense of homecoming. This was where I belonged. Not in the backyard of my childhood home, watching my family grapple with Rachel's betrayal. Not in the community college classrooms where I had been resigned to spending the next 2 years. But in the place where intellectual curiosity was celebrated, where potential was nurtured, where students like me could become the people we were meant to be. As I looked up from my phone, I realized that everyone was staring at me again. But this time their expressions were different. Instead of dismissive tolerance or gentle encouragement toward realistic expectations, I saw something I had never seen before. Genuine curiosity about who I really was beneath the surface they had always assumed was the complete picture. Tori, Mom said quietly, is there anything else you want to tell us? The question hung in the air like an invitation, an opportunity to reveal the truth about my own achievements, to claim my place in the spotlight that Rachel had occupied for so long. But as I stood there, holding my phone with Dr. Warner's messages and Harvard's promises, I realized that I didn't want the spotlight anymore. I had spent years craving recognition from my family, validation of my worth, acknowledgement of my potential. Now that the opportunity was here, I discovered that their recognition no longer mattered to me. I had been validated by people who understood excellence, who recognized achievement, who saw potential where it actually existed. Harvard University had chosen me not because I was someone's daughter or sister, but because I was Victoria Hayes, a person worth investing in on my own merit. The truth would come out eventually. In a few weeks, when I failed to show up for community college orientation and instead flew to Boston for Harvard Freshman Week, my family would understand the full scope of what had happened. They would realize that while they were debating Rachel's theft of a local scholarship, their other daughter had been quietly earning something far more significant. But for now, in this moment, the truth was mine to keep. It was my secret, my triumph, my future waiting to unfold on my own terms. "No," I said finally, meeting Mom's gaze with a calmness that surprised even me. "I think enough truth has been revealed for one day." The fallout from Rachel's confession spread through our extended family like wildfire in the Arizona desert. Within hours of the graduation party's abrupt end, my phone was buzzing with calls from cousins, aunts, and family friends who had heard fragments of the story and wanted to know what had really happened. Rachel had locked herself in her bedroom, refusing to come out even when Marcus had returned later that evening to collect the engagement ring he had asked her to give back. Mom spent most of the next 2 days alternating between making apologetic phone calls to relatives and staring at Rachel's bedroom door with the expression of someone trying to solve an impossible puzzle. Dad had taken time off work, claiming he needed to handle family business, but mostly he sat in his recliner drinking coffee and looking like someone who had discovered his entire understanding of his daughters had been built on false assumptions. Meanwhile, I was carrying on the most surreal double life imaginable. To my family, I was still Tori Hayes, the practical daughter who would be starting community college in a few weeks and living at home to save money. But in my private communications with Dr. Warner, I was Victoria Hayes, Presidential Merit Award recipient, incoming Harvard freshman, and someone whose future was about to change in ways my family couldn't even imagine. The Thursday morning campus visit had been everything I had dreamed and more. I had told my parents I was spending the day with friends, celebrating the end of high school, and had instead flown to Boston on Harvard's dime to see what would become my home for the next 4 years. Walking through Harvard Yard, sitting in on a sample lecture in the environmental engineering department, meeting other Presidential Merit Award recipients from around the country, it had felt like stepping into a life that belonged to someone else, someone more accomplished and deserving than I had ever believed myself to be. Dr. Warner had introduced me to Professor Rebecca Martinez, who would be my faculty mentor, and Professor Martinez had spent an hour discussing my research proposal on sustainable water purification systems with the kind of intellectual intensity I had never experienced before. She had asked questions that challenged my assumptions, suggested resources I had never heard of, and talked about my ideas with the respect typically reserved for graduate students or established researchers. "Your proposal shows real promise," Professor Martinez had said as we walked through the engineering laboratories that would soon become as familiar to me as my childhood bedroom. "The combination of biochemistry and environmental engineering is exactly the kind of interdisciplinary thinking we need to solve complex global problems. I think you're going to thrive here." Thrive, not survive, not manage, not make the best of limited options, but thrive. It was a word no one in my family had ever used to describe my potential, and hearing it from a Harvard professor felt like discovering I had been speaking a foreign language my entire life without realizing it. The other Presidential Merit Award recipients I had met were equally impressive and intimidating. Sarah from Vermont had already published research in a peer-reviewed journal while still in high school. James from Oregon had started a nonprofit organization that had raised over $200,000 for educational programs in rural communities. Maria from Texas had developed a mobile app that was being used by environmental scientists in 12 countries. These were my peers now, people who operated at a level of achievement I was only beginning to understand. But instead of feeling inadequate among them, I had felt energized, challenged, excited about the possibility of growing into someone who could contribute at their level. The transition to Harvard can be overwhelming. Dr. Warner had explained during our final meeting before my flight home. "You'll be surrounded by extraordinary people doing extraordinary things, and imposter syndrome is common among our incoming students. But remember, you weren't chosen by accident. The admissions committee sees potential in you that you may not even see in yourself yet. Flying back to Phoenix, I had pressed my face to the airplane window and watched the landscape change from the green forests of New England to the brown desert of the Southwest, feeling like I was traveling between two different worlds. In one world, I was an exceptional student with unlimited potential and access to resources that could help me change the world. In the other world, I was the disappointing daughter whose sister had stolen her scholarship and who would be starting community college in a few weeks. The contrast was so stark, it felt like living in a parallel universe. When I arrived home that evening, I found my family in crisis mode. Rachel had finally emerged from her bedroom, but only to announce that she was withdrawing from Arizona State University and giving up the Morrison Scholarship. "I can't live with what I've done," she had told Mom and Dad, her eyes red from crying and her voice hoarse from days of emotional turmoil. "Every time someone congratulates me on my achievement, I'll know it's built on a lie. Every time I walk across campus, I'll remember that I'm only there because I stole my sister's opportunity." The withdrawal had created a cascade of new problems. The scholarship committee would need to be notified, which would inevitably lead to questions about why the recipient was suddenly backing out. Marcus had already started telling people that the engagement was off, though he was being diplomatically vague about the reasons. Mom was fielding calls from ASU's orientation department, trying to explain why her daughter would not be attending after all without revealing the truth about the fraud. "Maybe we can fix this," Dad had suggested with the desperate optimism of someone trying to prevent a disaster he didn't fully understand. "Maybe if we explain to the scholarship committee that there was a misunderstanding, they'll work with us." A misunderstanding. Uncle Robert had been visiting when I returned from Boston, and his voice carried the sharp edge of someone who worked in an industry where mistakes had serious consequences. "David, this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was fraud. If the scholarship committee investigates, they could file criminal charges." Criminal charges. The words hung in our living room like a toxic cloud, making everyone's breathing seem labored and uncertain. Rachel had been so focused on the immediate consequences of her actions, losing Marcus, disappointing our parents, giving up her college plans, that she hadn't fully considered the legal implications of what she had done. "They wouldn't really prosecute, would they?" Mom had asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's just 18. She made a mistake." "Scholarship fraud is a serious crime," Uncle Robert had replied grimly. "Universities and scholarship organizations take this kind of thing very seriously because it undermines the integrity of their entire system. If they decide to make an example of her, she could be looking at fines, restitution, and even jail time." The possibility of Rachel facing criminal prosecution had shifted the family dynamic again. Instead of being angry about her betrayal of me, Mom and Dad were now focused on protecting her from the consequences of her actions. The conversation had turned to finding lawyers, managing public relations, and figuring out how to minimize the damage to Rachel's future. Through it all, I had sat quietly in the corner of the living room, still carrying the emotional high of my Harvard campus visit, while watching my family grapple with the destruction Rachel's choices had wrought. The contrast between my expanding opportunities and her collapsing prospects should have felt satisfying, but instead it just felt sad. My phone had buzzed with another message from Dr. Warner. "Victoria, I hope your campus visit confirmed that Harvard is the right fit for you. We're excited to welcome you to our community in just 5 weeks. Please let me know if you have any questions about the logistics of your move to Boston." 5 weeks. In 5 weeks, I would be living in a Harvard dormitory, attending classes with some of the brightest minds in the world, working on research that could actually make a difference. In 5 weeks, I would be Victoria Hayes, Harvard student, instead of Tori Hayes, disappointment daughter whose sister had stolen her scholarship. The secret was becoming harder to keep with each passing day. When Mom had asked about my community college orientation schedule, I had mumbled something about delayed paperwork. When Dad had offered to help me shop for school supplies, I had said I wanted to wait until closer to the start of classes. When relatives had called to check on how I was handling Rachel's situation, I had deflected their questions and changed the subject. But the lies were accumulating, and I knew they couldn't last much longer. Soon I would need to tell my family that their practical daughter, the one they had encouraged toward realistic expectations, had achieved something they had never imagined possible. The opportunity came 3 days later, when Dr. Warner called directly to the house phone instead of my cell. I was upstairs packing for Harvard, carefully selecting clothes that would be appropriate for Massachusetts weather, when I heard Mom answer the call downstairs. Hayes Residence, Patricia speaking. There was a pause, and then Mom's voice carried up the stairs with a tone of confusion and growing concern. I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong number. We don't have anyone here who's been accepted to Harvard University. My heart stopped. I dropped the sweater I had been folding and crept to the top of the staircase, straining to hear both sides of the conversation. Victoria Hayes. Mom was saying. Yes, that's my daughter, but there must be some mistake. She's enrolled at Maricopa Community College for the fall. The silence that followed seemed to last forever. I could picture Dr. Warner on the other end of the line, trying to process this unexpected information, probably wondering if she had somehow reached the wrong family, or if there was some administrative error in Harvard's records. The Presidential Merit Award. Mom's voice was rising in pitch with each word. I'm sorry, but that's impossible. My daughter didn't even apply to Harvard. She missed the scholarship deadline for our local university and had to settle for community college. I closed my eyes and leaned against the hallway wall, feeling the weight of the secret I had been carrying finally beginning to shift and crack. The moment of truth was arriving, whether I was ready for it or not. Could you hold on just a moment, please? Mom said, and I heard her footsteps moving toward the bottom of the stairs. Tori, she called up, her voice carrying a mixture of confusion and something that might have been hope. Can you come down here, please? There's someone on the phone who wants to talk to you about Harvard University. I took a deep breath, smoothed my hair, and walked downstairs with as much composure as I could manage. Mom was standing in the kitchen, holding the cordless phone, her expression cycling between bewilderment and growing realization. There's a Dr. Warner on the phone, she said slowly. She says she's calling about your acceptance to Harvard University and your scholarship award. I took the phone from her hands, aware that Dad had appeared in the kitchen doorway, and was watching this exchange with the alertness of someone who sensed that something significant was happening. Hello, Dr. Warner, I said calmly. I'm sorry about the confusion. My family wasn't aware of my acceptance because I haven't told them yet. The admission hung in the kitchen air, like smoke from a fire, impossible to ignore, and growing more substantive with each passing second. Mom's mouth fell open, and Dad stepped further into the room, with the expression of someone trying to catch up to a conversation that had started without him. Ah, Dr. Warner said, and I could hear understanding in her voice. I see. Well, I was calling to confirm some final details about your arrival on campus next month. Your dormitory assignment has been finalized, and we need to schedule your meeting with the financial aid office. Next month, Mom whispered, her voice barely audible. I nodded, still holding the phone, but looking directly at my parents. Dr. Warner, would it be possible for you to explain to my parents about the Presidential Merit Award? I think they might have some questions about how this happened. Of course, Dr. Warner said warmly. I'd be happy to speak with them. Could you put me on speakerphone? I pressed the speaker button and set the phone on the kitchen counter, creating a small circle of communication that would forever change the dynamic of our family. Dad moved closer, and I could see him trying to process what he was hearing. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes. Dr. Warner began, her voice filling our modest kitchen with the authority of Harvard University. I want to congratulate you on raising such an exceptional daughter. Victoria was selected for our Presidential Merit Award, from a pool of over 40,000 applicants. It's our most prestigious undergraduate scholarship, and it's awarded to only 50 students nationwide each year. The numbers hit my parents like physical blows. 40,000 applicants, 50 recipients. Their daughter, the one they had gently steered toward community college, had competed against tens of thousands of students, and emerged as one of the chosen few. I don't understand.
Oh!
Dad said slowly. When did she apply? When did this happen? Victoria submitted her application in February. Dr. Warner explained. Her research proposal on sustainable water purification systems was particularly impressive, as was her extensive volunteer work and academic record. The admissions committee was unanimous in their decision to offer her the award. February. While Rachel had been basking in the glory of the stolen Morrison Scholarship, while I had been resigned to community college, Harvard University had been evaluating my application and deciding that I was worthy of their highest honor. Mom sank into one of the kitchen chairs, her hand pressed to her chest, as though she was having trouble breathing. A full scholarship to Harvard University, she repeated faintly. Our Tori, the Presidential Merit Award, covers full tuition, room and board, a yearly stipend for personal expenses, guaranteed funding for undergraduate research, and access to exclusive internship programs. Dr. Warner continued. Victoria will also be paired with a faculty mentor and have priority placement in graduate programs, should she choose to continue her education at Harvard. The scope of what I had achieved was finally becoming clear to my parents. This wasn't just a college acceptance or even a scholarship. This was a complete transformation of my future, an opportunity that would open doors they had never imagined existed for their practical daughter. "Why didn't you tell us?" Mom asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Honey, why didn't you share this with us?" I looked at my parents, these people who had raised me with love but limited vision, who had encouraged me toward safety but not toward excellence, who had spent years unknowingly undermining my confidence while building up my sisters. "Because I didn't think you'd believe me," I said honestly. "Because for as long as I can remember, when I've tried to tell you about my achievements, you've redirected the conversation to Rachel's accomplishments. Because when I talked about my dreams, you told me to be realistic about my limitations." The words came out more gently than I had expected, without the anger or resentment I had carried for so long. Seeing my parents' faces as they grappled with the magnitude of what I had accomplished quietly, on my own, without their support or encouragement, I felt something shift inside me. Instead of vindication or satisfaction, I felt a profound sadness for all the celebrations we had missed, all the pride they could have felt, all the dreams they could have encouraged instead of limiting. "We never meant to discourage you," Dad said, his voice heavy with regret. "We thought we were protecting you from disappointment." "I know," I said simply. "But in trying to protect me from disappointment, you protected me from possibility too." Dr. Warner had been listening to this family conversation with the tactful silence of someone who understood that she was witnessing something significant. Now she spoke again, her voice warm with professional compassion. "Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Hayes, I want you to know that Victoria's achievements are entirely her own. She demonstrated exceptional initiative, intellectual curiosity, and social commitment in her application. You should be very proud of the young woman you've raised." "We are," Mom said, tears streaming down her face now. "We're so proud, and we're so sorry we didn't see it sooner." The apology hung in the kitchen air, carrying the weight of years of misunderstood potential and overlooked achievements. But as I looked at my parents, I realized that their recognition, while meaningful, was no longer necessary for my sense of self-worth. I had spent years craving their validation, their acknowledgement that I was capable of extraordinary things. Now that I had it, I discovered that I had already found validation from sources that mattered more. Harvard University had validated my intellectual capabilities. Professor Martinez had validated my research potential. Dr. Warner and the admissions committee had validated my worthiness for opportunities I had barely dared to dream about. My parents' pride was gratifying, but it was no longer essential to my understanding of who I was or what I could achieve. "Dr. Warner," I said, turning my attention back to the phone, "when do I need to be on campus for orientation?" "Freshman move-in is August 15th, she replied. "You'll want to plan to arrive a few days early for the Presidential Merit Award recipients' welcome events. I can email you the complete schedule." August 15th. In less than 3 weeks, I would be leaving Phoenix, leaving the family dynamics that had shaped my understanding of myself for 18 years, leaving behind the identity of the practical daughter with limited potential. I would be stepping into a new life, as Victoria Hayes, Harvard student, Presidential Merit Award recipient, someone whose future was limited only by her own ambition and ability. The transformation felt both terrifying and exhilarating, like standing at the edge of a cliff, and realizing that instead of falling, I was about to learn how to fly. "We'll be there," Dad said suddenly, his voice stronger than it had been since this conversation began. "We'll drive you to Boston, help you move into your dormitory, meet your professors. We want to be part of this." The offer was touching and completely impractical. Driving from Phoenix to Boston would take 4 days, and my parents had never traveled outside of Arizona, except for one family vacation to Disneyland, when Rachel and I were children. "Dad, you don't need to drive me across the country," I said gently. "Harvard provides travel assistance for scholarship recipients. I'll fly there and you can visit during Parents' Weekend." But I could see the determination in his eyes, the desperate need to be involved in this momentous transition, to somehow make up for years of not recognizing what was happening right under his nose. "No," he said firmly, "we missed too much already. We're not missing this." As I looked at my parents, both of them crying now, both of them trying to process the reality that their overlooked daughter had achieved something extraordinary. I felt the last vestiges of my resentment toward them dissolve. They had made mistakes, yes. They had underestimated me, yes. But they had also raised me with enough strength and independence that I had been able to achieve my dreams even without their recognition or support. In a strange way, their lack of validation had forced me to develop my own internal compass, my own sense of worth that wasn't dependent on external approval. That strength would serve me well at Harvard, where I would be surrounded by high achievers and intense competition. Rachel's theft of my local scholarship had been devastating at the time, but it had also freed me from the limitations of what my family thought I could achieve. While she was stealing my backup plan, I was earning my real dream through my own merit and determination. The irony was perfect and profound in trying to destroy my future. My sister had actually helped me discover a future far greater than anything I had originally imagined for myself. The morning of my departure for Harvard arrived with the kind of crystalline desert clarity that makes Phoenix beautiful despite its harsh reputation. I stood in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by boxes containing 18 years of accumulated life, trying to decide what belonged in my future and what should remain in my past. The contrast between the girl who had lived in this room and the young woman about to embark on a journey to Cambridge felt almost unbridgeable. My suitcases were packed with clothes appropriate for New England weather, purchased during frantic shopping trips with Mom, who had transformed overnight from someone encouraging realistic expectations to someone determined to ensure her Harvard-bound daughter had everything she could possibly need. The enthusiasm of her conversion was both touching and exhausting, as though she was trying to make up for years of overlooked potential through sheer volume of material support. Rachel had emerged from her self-imposed exile to help with my packing, a gesture that carried complicated emotional weight for both of us. She moved through my room like someone walking through a museum exhibit of her sister's secret achievements, touching books I had read for pure intellectual curiosity, examining research papers I had written for environmental science competitions she had never known I entered, discovering layer after layer of evidence that the sister she thought she knew had been living a completely different life. "I never realized you were this smart," she said quietly, holding a copy of a scientific journal that had published an article I had co-authored with my environmental science teacher. "I mean, I knew you got good grades, but this is different." The admission was painful in its honesty. Rachel was confronting the reality that her theft of my scholarship application hadn't been a crime against an equal competitor, but a crime against someone whose achievements far exceeded her own. The Morrison Scholarship she had stolen was designed for good students pursuing practical degrees at state universities. The Presidential Merit Award I had earned was reserved for exceptional students with the potential to change the world. "Smart isn't the right word," I replied, carefully folding a sweater that would see me through Cambridge winters. "Curious is better. I've always been curious about how things work, why problems exist, what solutions might be possible. Is that why you never told us about any of this?" she asked, gesturing toward the evidence of my hidden accomplishments. "Because you thought we wouldn't understand curiosity." The question cut straight to the heart of our family dynamics. Rachel had always operated in the realm of achievement for recognition, success for status, accomplishment for approval. She had struggled to understand someone who pursued knowledge for its own sake, who found satisfaction in solving problems rather than in being celebrated for solving them. "I told you about some of it," I said carefully. "But whenever I tried to share something I was excited about, the conversation would shift to your achievements or redirect toward more practical concerns." After a while I stopped trying. Rachel sat down on my desk chair, the same chair where I had spent countless hours working on research projects, writing essays, and preparing for competitions my family never knew existed. Her reflection in my desktop mirror looked smaller somehow, diminished by the accumulating evidence of how little she had really known about the person she had lived with for 18 years. "The scholarship application," she said suddenly. "When I took it, I thought I was stealing from someone who was basically my equal academically. I thought the only difference between us was that I was better at presenting myself, better at getting recognition for what I did. And now?" She was quiet for a long moment, studying her hands with the intensity of someone seeing them for the first time. "Now I realize I stole from someone who was playing a completely different game. You weren't even trying to compete with me because you were already competing at a level I couldn't imagine reaching." The acknowledgement should have felt vindicating, but instead it just felt sad. Rachel's theft had been motivated by insecurity and jealousy, but it had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of who I was and what I was capable of achieving. She had committed a crime to steal a small piece of a future that was nothing compared to the future I was creating for myself. The Morrison Scholarship was never my real goal, I said gently. It was my backup plan, my safety net. When you took it, I was devastated, because I thought it was my only chance at college. I didn't know that Harvard was even a possibility until they called. Harvard was always a possibility for you, Rachel said with the flat certainty of someone stating an obvious fact. Looking at all this evidence, looking at what you accomplished without anyone even noticing, Harvard was probably inevitable. Inevitable. The word felt strange applied to my own life. Nothing about my journey to Harvard had felt inevitable while I was living it. Every achievement had required effort, every recognition had required initiative, every opportunity had required me to push beyond what felt comfortable or safe. But looking back from this vantage point, I could see a pattern of curiosity and determination that had been building towards something significant, even when I didn't understand the ultimate destination. The sound of voices downstairs interrupted our conversation. Mom and Dad were entertaining a steady stream of relatives who had come to say goodbye, each of them grappling with the dramatic revision to their understanding of the Hayes family dynamics. The quiet daughter who had been gently encouraged toward community college was leaving for Harvard University, while the golden daughter who had been destined for great things was facing the possibility of criminal prosecution for scholarship fraud. Uncle Robert's voice carried up the stairs with the boom of someone making pronouncements. I always knew that girl had something special about her. Didn't I always say Tori was the one to watch? The revisionist history was amusing but ultimately irrelevant. People were naturally adjusting their memories to accommodate this new information, convinced they had always seen potential that most of them had actively overlooked. But their revised perspectives didn't change the reality of my journey, or the satisfaction of having achieved something extraordinary through my own efforts. I should apologize to them, Rachel said suddenly. To Mom and Dad, to you. To everyone who's going to find out what I did. You should, I agreed. But not because you got caught, because what you did was wrong regardless of the consequences. She nodded slowly, and I could see her trying to work through the complex process of genuine remorse versus regret about getting caught. The distinction was important, not just for her own moral development, but for any possibility of rebuilding trust with the people she had betrayed. A knock on my bedroom door interrupted us, and Dr. Warner's voice called from the hallway. She had flown to Phoenix specifically to escort me to Harvard, a gesture that demonstrated the university's investment in their Presidential Merit Award recipients. Her presence in our modest suburban home felt surreal, like having a representative of a foreign government show up for dinner. Victoria, are you ready for our trip to the airport? She asked, entering the room with the polished confidence of someone equally comfortable in academic settings and family homes. I know goodbyes can be difficult, but we want to make sure you have time to settle in before orientation activities begin. Warner's presence seemed to fill the room with possibilities and expectations, a living reminder that my future was no longer limited by the horizons visible from my childhood bedroom window. In her wake came the understanding that this departure was not just a transition to college, but a transformation into someone whose life would unfold on a completely different scale than anything my family had previously imagined. I'm ready, I said, though the words felt inadequate to describe the mixture of excitement and terror that came with leaving everything familiar behind. Rachel stood up from the desk chair and faced Dr. Warner with the posture of someone preparing to make a confession. Warner, there's something you should know about my family. Something that affects Victoria. I started to interrupt, but Dr. Warner held up a gentle hand and gave Rachel her full attention. What would you like me to know? I stole my sister's scholarship application earlier this year, Rachel said, the words coming out in a rush of nervous energy. I submitted it under my own name and received a scholarship that should have gone to her. She never told you about it because she was protecting me, but you should know the kind of person she is. Dr. Warner listened without judgment, her expression thoughtful rather than shocked. When Rachel finished speaking, she was quiet for a moment before responding with the measured tone of someone who had encountered human complexity many times before. Thank you for telling me that, she said finally. It explains some things about Victoria that I found remarkable during our conversations. What things? I asked. genuinely curious about how my family situation had been visible to someone who had only known me for a few weeks. Your unusual combination of exceptional achievement and modest self-presentation, Dr. Warner explained. Most students who accomplish what you've accomplished develop a certain confidence about their abilities, a comfort with recognition and praise. You seemed almost surprised when we celebrated your achievements, as though you weren't entirely convinced you deserved the recognition. The observation was uncomfortably accurate. I had spent so many years having my accomplishments overlooked or minimized that I had learned to doubt my own assessment of their significance. Even receiving the Presidential Merit Award had felt partially like a mistake, as though Harvard had somehow confused me with someone more deserving. Students who succeed despite lack of recognition often develop remarkable resilience and self-motivation, Dr. Warner continued. They learn to pursue excellence for its own sake rather than for external validation. These are exactly the qualities we value most in our Presidential Merit Award recipients. The irony was profound. My family's failure to recognize my potential had actually helped me develop the characteristics that made me an ideal candidate for Harvard's most prestigious scholarship. Their limitations had inadvertently strengthened the very qualities that would serve me best in an environment of high achievement and intense competition. Victoria will thrive at Harvard, Dr. Warner said with conviction, precisely because she's learned to thrive without external validation. She's developed internal motivation and intellectual curiosity that will serve her well in our community. As we prepared to leave for the airport, the entire extended family gathered in the living room for final goodbyes. The scene felt like something from a movie about family reconciliation, with everyone trying to pack years of delayed recognition into a few moments of concentrated attention. Aunts who had barely acknowledged my existence at previous family gatherings were suddenly eager to discuss my research interests. Cousins who had always gravitated toward Rachel were asking detailed questions about my plans at Harvard. Mom was crying openly now, holding me with the fierce intensity of someone trying to memorize a moment they knew would never come again. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "I'm so sorry we didn't see what was right in front of us." Dad's goodbye was characteristically practical but emotionally loaded. "You call us whenever you need anything," he said gruffly. "Money, advice, someone to listen. We're going to do better at staying connected." The promise was touching, but I suspected that our relationship would naturally evolve as I grew into my new environment. The daughter who returned for Christmas break would be different from the one leaving for Cambridge, shaped by experiences and challenges that would expand my understanding of what was possible for my life. Uncle Robert approached with the solemnity of someone delivering important life advice. "Don't let them intimidate you up there," he said firmly. "You belong at Harvard just as much as anyone else. More than most, considering what you've achieved starting from here." The sentiment was well-meaning, but it reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of what I expected to find at Harvard. I wasn't worried about being intimidated by other students or feeling out of place among high achievers. I was excited about being surrounded by people who shared my intellectual curiosity, who would challenge me to think bigger and achieve more than I had previously imagined possible. Mrs. Rodriguez had come over to join the farewell gathering, and she approached me with the careful expression of someone who had inadvertently triggered a family crisis. "Tori, I hope you can forgive me for bringing up that scholarship business at the graduation party. I never intended to cause so much trouble for your family." "You didn't cause any trouble," I replied honestly. "You revealed truth that needed to come out." Rachel's actions had consequences, and pretending otherwise wouldn't have made those consequences disappear. The scholarship committee had indeed launched an investigation after Rachel's withdrawal raised red flags about the application's authenticity. The fraud would likely result in financial penalties and a permanent mark on her record, but the criminal prosecution Uncle Robert had worried about seemed unlikely given her age and cooperation with the investigation. More significantly, Rachel would be starting her adult life with the knowledge that her first major achievement had been built on theft from her own sister. That understanding would shape her character in ways that could lead to genuine growth or deeper resentment, depending on choices she had yet to make. As Dr. Warner and I prepared to leave for the airport, Rachel approached for her own private goodbye. She looked smaller somehow, diminished not just by the consequences of her actions, but by the expanded understanding of who I actually was beneath the surface she had always assumed was the complete picture. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," she said quietly. "But I want you to know that I understand what I took from you now. Not just the scholarship, but the recognition, the support, the belief in your potential. I stole more than an application. I stole your place in this family. The apology was more insightful than I had expected, demonstrating a level of understanding that suggested genuine remorse, rather than mere regret about getting caught. But it also revealed how much she still didn't understand about my relationship with achievement and recognition. You couldn't steal my place in this family, I said gently. My place was never dependent on their recognition of my achievements, and you couldn't steal my potential because that was never something external that could be taken away. Then what did I steal? She asked, genuinely confused. Time, I said simply. You stole time I spent doubting myself, time I spent thinking I wasn't good enough for the opportunities I wanted, time I spent believing I had to settle for less than my dreams. But it turns out that time wasn't wasted after all. It taught me to value my own assessment of my worth more than other people's recognition. The lesson had been painful but ultimately valuable. Learning to trust my own judgment about my capabilities, to pursue goals even when others discouraged them, to find satisfaction in achievement regardless of external validation. These were skills that would serve me well in any environment, but especially in the competitive academic world I was about to enter. The drive to the airport felt like traveling through a landscape that was already becoming part of my past rather than my present. The Phoenix suburbs that had contained my entire world for 18 years looked smaller from the perspective of someone whose future would unfold in Cambridge, Massachusetts. The desert mountains that had formed the horizon of my childhood dreams seemed less limiting when viewed by someone whose horizons were expanding beyond anything previously imaginable. At the airport, Dr. Warner handled the logistics of our departure with the efficiency of someone who had guided many students through this transition. But she also understood the emotional significance of the moment, giving my family time for final embraces and last-minute expressions of love and pride. Mom's final words were characteristic in their emotional intensity. You make us proud every single day, sweetheart. You always have, even when we were too blind to see it. Dad's goodbye was more practical but equally meaningful. You remember where you come from, but don't let where you come from limit where you're going. As our plane lifted off from Sky Harbor Airport, I pressed my face to the window and watched Phoenix shrink beneath us. The city that had shaped my first 18 years becoming a pattern of lights against the desert darkness. The symbolic weight of the moment wasn't lost on me. I was literally rising above the limitations that had defined my understanding of what was possible for my life. Dr. Warner had given me space to process the goodbye privately, but as we reached cruising altitude, she began talking about what awaited me at Harvard. The orientation schedule, the academic resources, the research opportunities, the community of scholars I would be joining. Each detail felt like a door opening onto possibilities I was only beginning to understand. The transition can be overwhelming, she said kindly. You'll be surrounded by students who were also exceptional in their home communities. The key is remembering that you were chosen not just for what you've already achieved, but for your potential to grow and contribute in ways you haven't yet discovered. Potential to grow. The phrase resonated with something deep in my understanding of myself. For years I had been encouraged to be realistic about my limitations, to choose safe paths that matched my family's assessment of my capabilities. Now I was entering an environment where I would be challenged to exceed my own understanding of what I could achieve. The flight attendant offered us dinner, and I found myself thinking about the last family meal I had shared before leaving Phoenix. Rachel had cooked, a gesture of service that felt like an attempt at penance. She had asked detailed questions about my research interests, my plans for coursework, my hopes for my time at Harvard. The curiosity felt genuine rather than obligatory, as though she was finally seeing me as someone worth knowing rather than someone to compete with. During that dinner, she had made an unexpected announcement. She was planning to reapply to universities for the following year, this time using her own achievements and her own words. The process of confronting her theft had apparently sparked a genuine desire to discover what she could accomplish through her own efforts. I want to know who I really am when I'm not trying to be you, she had said, words that carried both insight and sadness. The comment had stayed with me because it highlighted how much Rachel's identity had been built around comparison and competition rather than authentic self-discovery. In stealing my achievements, she had robbed herself of the opportunity to understand her own strengths and interests. Her path toward genuine self-knowledge would be longer and more difficult because of the detour through deception, but it wasn't impossible if she committed to the work. As our plane began its descent into Boston, I could see the lights of Cambridge in the distance, the city that would become my home for the next 4 years. The Harvard campus was invisible from this altitude, but I knew it was there, waiting with libraries full of knowledge I had yet to discover, laboratories equipped for research I had yet to conduct, professors ready to challenge me in ways I had yet to imagine. Dr. Warner had arranged for a car to take us directly to campus, where I would spend my first night in the dormitory, that would become as familiar as my childhood bedroom had been. The Presidential Merit Award recipients had early arrival privileges, which meant I would have a few days to acclimate before the general freshman chaos began. "Are you nervous?" Dr. Warner asked as we collected our luggage from the carousel. I considered the question seriously. Was I nervous about leaving everything familiar behind? About competing academically with some of the brightest students in the world? About living independently for the first time? About proving myself worthy of the investment Harvard was making in my potential? "I'm excited," I said finally, realizing that it was completely true. "I'm excited to discover what I'm capable of when I'm surrounded by people who expect excellence rather than settling for good enough." The drive through Cambridge at night revealed glimpses of the world I was entering. Bookstores still open despite the late hour, students walking with purpose even in summer, architecture that spoke of centuries of intellectual tradition. This was a place where curiosity was currency, where asking difficult questions was more valuable than providing easy answers, where the pursuit of knowledge was considered among the highest forms of human endeavor. When we pulled up to my dormitory, I could see lights in windows, where other early arrival students were settling into their new lives. These were my peers now, people who had earned their place at Harvard through exceptional achievement, who shared my commitment to pushing beyond conventional limitations, who would challenge me to grow in ways I couldn't yet anticipate. As I stood on the steps of my dormitory with my suitcases, looking up at the building that would be my home for the next year, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. The sister who had tried to steal my future had inadvertently helped me discover a future far greater than anything I had originally imagined. The family who had encouraged me toward realistic expectations had unknowingly prepared me for opportunities that exceeded their ability to envision. Most importantly, I had learned that my worth wasn't dependent on other people's recognition, that my potential wasn't limited by other people's expectations, and that my dreams were valid regardless of whether anyone else believed in them. As I walked through the doors of my Harvard dormitory, I was no longer Tori Hayes, the disappointed daughter who had settled for community college. I was Victoria Hayes, Presidential Merit Award recipient, future environmental engineer, and someone whose story was just beginning to unfold. The betrayal that had felt like the end of my dreams had actually been the beginning of my real life, and that life was going to be extraordinary. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.